Well, how was it, working at ESPN, and then the Kaepernick thing starts to happen, and the kneeling and so forth? What was ESPN's overall, you know, kind of take on this, and how much they did want to cover or not want to cover?
I can tell you in the entire time I was at ESPN, there was no issue that somebody told me to talk about. There was no issue someone told me not to talk about. So it was never a thing of, oh, you guys need to present it this way or that way. I mean, there were certain boundaries that we had, but they were boundaries I feel like any media or news outlet would probably have. I mean, no personal attacks and those sorts of things, just common sense things. And even though there was this stupid narrative that ESPN was a liberal network, there was a lot of varied opinions about Colin Kaepernick on ESPN. There were just as many people who supported his protest and his right to protest as there were people who thought it was a huge distraction and that wasn't the place for it. I just think that people just kind of conveniently forgot what everybody said. So for me, and for our show, we wanted to address Kaepernick within the scope of the news. We were not just going to pull Colin Kaepernick topics within thin air. And in fact, the last year that I was on SportsCenter, producers came to us many more times trying to get us to talk about Colin Kaepernick, but we felt like we had said everything that needed to be said. We were not the show that a quarterback every time a quarterback was signed off the couch, we were not the show that was going to do a Colin Kaepernick just because, right? We like to do it when there was some real meat there and real news development. So, yeah, I mean, for us, we always approach that situation not just judiciously. We weren't scared. It's just we were just trying to follow the news.
Like, were you in contact personally with Kaepernick during that time?
No, I was not personally in contact
Okay.
with him.
And what was your overall take over what was happening?
Well, uh, I'll admit though, for a while, I never thought it would get as extreme as it did. I knew his protest as it was happening, it was generating a lot of news, but I knew the day that Donald Trump called him out by name, I knew he would never play in the NFL again,
Hmm.
and it was a startling realization, but that's how much pressure that Donald Trump had applied on NFL owners. Pressure they seemingly were willing to bend and succumb to. And it's sort of a shame because historically this will look so unfavorably upon the NFL that you have built a wall around your league for a player whose only mission, whose only will was to stand up for people who he considered to be voiceless, people who he felt like had suffered many injustices. He's sticking up for equality. This should not be hard, you know, and yet for them to blackball him from the NFL, it says more about the NFL than it does about Colin Kaepernick. And this is a league that has welcomed people who have committed violent acts toward women. They've welcomed people who have committed all sorts of violent acts toward all sorts of people.
Yeah, I mean, someone who had a dogfighting ring,
Yeah, I mean,
played in the NFL afterwards.
and it's not about saying that people don't deserve second chances.
Right.
And I even hesitate to compare Colin Kaepernick to people who have actually committed criminal acts. But it is to say that shows you what the NFL values.
Well, do you feel that Kaepernick is being blackballed, or is his skill level somewhat on the fringe these days, where it's not an obvious hire for any NFL team?
So recently, we just witnessed Mark Sanchez come in and have a 0 passer rating. I can think of high school quarterbacks. I can think of junior varsity high school quarterbacks that can come in and do better than a 0 passer rating. When you look at some of the guys that they're signing in the NFL, they're doing everything possible not to dial Colin Kaepernick's number. We've
Okay.
seen Nathan Peterman, a few versions, all with the same result. He's not good. All right. And not only do you have Mark Sanchez, you have Josh Johnson, you have all these guys who are getting opportunities in the league, and it's purposeful at this point. that they are not looking in Colin Kaepernick's direction. I mean, with Washington, he replaced Alex Smith in San Francisco. Okay, so whatever system they're running in Washington, you can't tell me Colin Kaepernick isn't at least a little bit familiar with it, being that he eventually replaced the guy that ran it in Washington.
Yeah.
And, people forget his last year. I mean, I think he finished with 17 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. The team wasn't very good, so of course they weren't going to win. But Colin looked like a starter in the NFL. And again, I just think it just exposes so much about this league that his protest is so bothersome to their sensibilities. Because it's not even a bottom line question. Because ask Nike, is it a bottom line question? Because they can't keep his merchandise on the shelf. So the NFL is too worried about capitulating to the wrong crowd. Just because you have people yelling about, I won't watch the NFL anymore, that doesn't make it true. And I've long believed that all those people who said they didn't watch because of the protests were just flat out lying. Because that didn't seem to bear out. If NFL ratings, I know they were down a couple years ago, had everything to do with the matchups and had everything to do with the game. It had nothing to do with Colin Kaepernick.
Well, ultimately, ESPN actually stopped showing the national anthem before Monday Night Football.
But they had always done that.
This
they
wasn't a
done
new
that.
thing?
The reason why it became a
News.
story is because they sort of reiterated that's what they did. And as a result, people sort of treated it like new news. And that's the other thing, too. It's like, I can't say, I mean, there was no widespread policy where people were, sort of showing the national anthems. When it was news, they were definitely showing, just to take stock of, okay, who's kneeling, who's standing, that sort of thing. But the level of outrage that some people had over something that I'm guessing a lot of them took a bathroom break during was just a little bit disingenuous and intellectually lazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, people are still watching football. Whenever there's a game
They're
on,
going
it's
to
still
watch.
trending, on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so all this was happening, and, you were fairly known in the sports community. But then there was a tweet about Trump, where you said Donald Trump is a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. Trump is the most ignorant, offensive president of my lifetime. He is a direct result of white supremacy, period. Before tweeting that, did you sit back and think about what's about to happen when you press that enter button?
No, not at all. I didn't realize that was breaking news. I'll be honest. And the context of that, it was an exchange. It was not me adding real Donald Trump on Twitter and saying, hey, here's his takes.
You were responding to a troll?
I was responding to somebody who was trying to figure out why I had this level of disdain for the president. Mm-hmm. And so in the context of that explanation, that's what came out. And that was to that person. And, as I should have figured that even in a reply situation, eyes are watching. And that tweet started to gather some steam. And I never expected for those comments to reach the White House.